Putin News Now. The Russian invasion actually made a lot of sense. That Russian President Vladimir Putin's decision to invade Ukraine was irrational is widely held in the West. Former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson said on the eve of the invasion that the United States and its allies may not have done enough to deter an irrational actor, and we have to accept at the moment that Vladimir Putin is possibly thinking illogically about this and doesn't see the disaster ahead. After the war broke out, U.S. Senator Mitt Romney made a similar point, saying, "By invading Ukraine, Mr. Putin has already proven that he is capable of illogical and self-defeating decisions." Both claims rest on the premise that leaders are only willing to wage war when they are confident of victory. The argument went like this: Putin showed his irrationality by starting a war he was doomed to lose. Putin's critics say he acted irrationally because he broke a key international norm. The only justifiable justification for going to war, according to this view, is self-defense. However, the invasion of Ukraine was a war of conquest. Putin, according to Russia expert Nina Khrushcheva, has succumbed to his ego-driven obsession with restoring Russia's status as a great power with its own clearly defined sphere of influence, and thus, joins a long line of irrational tyrants. Russia's president has been called a power-hungry megalomaniac by Vanity Fair's Bess Levin, and the invasion of his country was cited by Britain's former ambassador to Moscow, Tony Brenton, as evidence that Putin has become an unbalanced autocrat, rather than the rational actor he was before. These arguments are based on simplistic, intuitively appealing, but ultimately flawed conceptions of what it means to be rational. The common belief that rationality equals success and irrationality equals failure is false. The end result is irrelevant to rationality. The failure of rational actors to achieve their goals is not due to irrational thought processes, but rather to external factors beyond their control. Since both rationality and morality are often considered to be hallmarks of modern, progressive thought, there is also a strong tendency to equate the two. However, this is also an error. It is possible for rational policies to be murderously unjust and in violation of generally accepted norms of behavior. Just what, then, is rationality in global politics? The academic literature, surprisingly, does not offer a clear definition. Rationality, from our perspective, is all about understanding the world and its workings in order to make good choices about how to get where we want to go. It can be experienced on a personal and a social level. Homo theoreticus likes to think about things, and that includes rational policymakers. They employ plausible theories, which are rational explanations based on realistic assumptions and backed up by substantial evidence, to comprehend their predicament and plan their next steps in the international system. An important feature of a rational state is its deliberative process, which is characterized by open and robust debate among key policymakers. All of this suggests that Russia made the right choice in invading Ukraine. Think about the fact that the Russian government relied on a sound explanation to satisfy a nostalgic yearning among Russians, but that makes no strategic sense in the modern world. Most commentators dispute this claim and argue that Putin was intent on conquering Ukraine and other countries in Eastern Europe to create a greater Russian empire. Joe Biden, the vice president, claims that Putin wants to unite all Russian speakers under his leadership. I mean, to put it simply, I find it unreasonable. I don't think he's a rational actor because he's fearful, right? Asks H.R. McMaster, former national security advisor. His top priority is returning Russia to its former glory. What motivates him is that. It is clear, however, that Putin and his advisors viewed the West's efforts to turn Ukraine into a bulwark on Russia's border as an existential threat that could not be allowed to stand, reasoning that this would lead to a catastrophic shift in the balance of power. In a speech justifying Russia's decision to go to war, President Putin explained his thinking as follows: "With NATO's eastward expansion, the situation for Russia has been becoming worse and more dangerous by the year. We can't just sit back and watch things unfold. To act in such a reckless manner would be disastrous for us." He continued, "It is not only a very real threat to our interests, but to the very existence of our state and to its sovereignty. We've discussed this threshold many times before. They're over the line now." Putin saw this conflict as one of self-defense against a potential change in the power dynamic. He wasn't planning to invade and annex every part of Ukraine to make Russia even bigger. In fact, he stated that Russians and Ukrainians were one people, a single whole, and that we respect Ukrainians' desire to see their country free, safe, and prosperous, in his famous historical account of relations between Russia and Ukraine. What Ukraine becomes is entirely up to its people. This is not to downplay the fact that his objectives have broadened since the war began, but this is par for the course as conflicts develop and circumstances shift. Moscow aggressively sought diplomatic solutions to the growing threat on its borders, but the United States and its allies were not willing to budge. Russia proposed on December 17, 2021, that Ukraine become neutral and that NATO forces withdraw from Eastern Europe to their positions in 1997 in an effort to defuse the escalating crisis. However, America flatly refused to accept it. Putin therefore chose war, which experts predicted would end with Russian forces dominating in Ukraine. Before the invasion, U.S. officials were of the opinion that Russia would quickly win the initial, tactical phase of this war, if it comes, as David Ignatius of The Washington Post described. Russia's massive army massed on Ukraine's borders could take the capital of Kyiv in a few days and the entire country in a little over a week. The CIA told the White House that Russia would win in a matter of days by quickly overwhelming the Ukrainian army, and this prediction came to pass. These predictions didn't pan out, but it's important to remember that even the most well-intentioned policymakers can err when dealing with the world's inherent uncertainty. The Russian invasion was also not a spontaneous act but the result of careful consideration. Once again, many observers disagree, saying that Putin did not have significant input from civilian and military advisors who would have cautioned against his reckless bid for empire. He hasn't had that many people giving him direct inputs, as the head of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Senator Mark Warner, put it. As a result, we worry that this solitary person has developed a megalomaniacal sense of self-importance, thinking that only he can restore the glory days of Russia and the Soviet Union. One cause of Russia's irrationality, according to former U.S. Ambassador to Moscow Michael McFaul, is that Vladimir Putin is profoundly isolated, surrounded only by yes-men who have cut him off from accurate knowledge. However, Putin's inner circle and its perspective on Ukraine contradict this. Putin consulted with his superiors, all of whom agreed with his assessment of the threat Russia faced, before making the decision to go to war. In a 2008 memorandum, then Ambassador to Russia William Burns warned that Ukrainian entry into NATO is the brightest of all red lines for the Russian elite, not just Putin, to illustrate the widespread agreement among Russian leaders about the dangers posed by Ukraine's relationship with the West. After more than 2.5 years of talking to influential Russians, I have yet to meet anyone who doesn't see Ukraine joining NATO as a direct threat to Russian interests, and that includes everyone from knuckle-draggers in the depths of the Kremlin to Putin's harshest liberal critics. I can't think of a big enough deal to make the Russians take this medicine quietly. And contrary to what tales of Putin plotting in COVID-induced confinement suggested, he does not appear to have made the decision for war on his own. Sergei Lavrov, Russia's foreign minister, was asked if Vladimir Putin consulted with his top advisors. He responded, "Every country has a decision-making mechanism. In that case, the Russian Federation's existing mechanism was used to its full potential. Putin may have only consulted a small group of close advisors before deciding to launch the invasion, but this is par for the course when top officials are under pressure." All of this suggests that Putin deliberated with political allies who shared his core beliefs and concerns about Ukraine before making the decision to invade. Russia's decision to invade Ukraine was not only logical, but also not unprecedented. It is often claimed that major powers acted irrationally when in fact they were acting in a rational manner. On the list is Germany before and during the First World War, as well as Japan in the 1930s and the years leading up to Pearl Harbor. The two cases are similar in that the top policymakers consulted established theories of international politics and conferred among themselves to develop plans for addressing the challenges they faced.